They told her she was nothing, just a defect, a weak omega who would freeze the moment she stepped outside the pack borders. But fate has a funny way of twisting the knife. When Isolde Sterling was thrown into the blizzard to die, she didn't find death. She found a cave. Inside that cave weren't monsters, but 12 dying wolves, 12 predators that the entire world feared. She didn't run, she didn't scream, she saved them. She had no idea that the wolf shivering in her arms wasn't just a stray. He was the most ruthless Alpha King in history. And when the sun rose, the man who woke up didn't just want to thank her. He wanted to burn the world down for her. This is the story of how a rejected reject became a queen overnight. The wind howled through the cracks of the Silver Creek pack house, a sound that usually signaled the pack to huddle together by the fire. But tonight, the warmth was reserved for everyone except Isolde Sterling. At 21 years old, Isolde was the pack's anomaly. She was the daughter of the former Beta, a man named Arthur Sterling, who had died a hero, yet she had presented as a wolf with no shift. She was stuck in human form, physically weaker than the others, and designated as the lowest-ranking Omega. In the brutal hierarchy of Silver Creek, usefulness was the only currency, and Isolde was bankrupt. Tonight was the winter solstice ball, the night meant for fated mates. The great hall was decorated with pine and holly, the air thick with the scent of roasted venison and expensive wine. Alpha Jackson, a man with jawline sharp enough to cut glass and an ego to match, stood at the head of the room. He was the man Isolde had loved since childhood, the man who, in private moments years ago, had promised to look after her. But promises in the werewolf world were as brittle as winter ice. "Isolde Sterling," Jackson's voice boomed, cutting through the chatter. The music stopped. Isolde, wearing a faded grey dress she had stitched herself, stepped forward. She held a tray of wine glasses, her hands trembling. She thought he was calling her to serve the head table. "Put the tray down," Jackson sneered, his eyes flashing a cold amber. "You are staining the mood." Isolde placed the tray on a side table, clutching her hands together. "I'm sorry, Alpha. I was just doing my chores." "That's the problem," Jackson said, stepping off the dais. He walked toward her, circling her like a shark. "You are a chore, a burden. For 3 years this pack has fed you, clothed you, and tolerated your lack of a wolf. We hoped the solstice would finally trigger your shift. But look at you." He gestured to her frail form. The crowd snickered. Among them was Brittany, a high-ranking warrior female who had been eyeing Jackson all night. "I contribute," Isolde whispered, her voice barely audible. "I manage the infirmary logs. I mix the salves for the wounded." "We don't need a nursemaid," Jackson roared, the sound vibrating in Isolde's chest. "We need warriors. We need breeders. And tonight, the moon goddess has blessed me. I have found my mate." Isolde's heart stopped. She looked up, a foolish hope sparking that maybe, despite her weakness, the bond would snap into place. Jackson reached out, but his hand bypassed Isolde completely. He grabbed Brittany by the waist and pulled her flush against him. "Brittany is strong. She is lethal. She is worthy of being Luna." The room erupted in cheers. Isolde stood there, frozen, feeling the invisible thread of her own fated bond, which she could feel tugging toward Jackson, snap and wither. He was rejecting the bond before it even fully formed. He chose power over fate. "And as my first act as a mated alpha," Jackson announced, silencing the room, "I am trimming the fat. Isolde Sterling, you are hereby banished from the Silver Creek pack." The silence that followed was heavy. Banishment in winter was a death sentence. "Jackson, please," Isolde begged, falling to her knees. It's 20 degrees below zero. The blizzard is setting in. You can't. I can, he spat. You have 1 hour to clear your scent from my territory. If you are found within the borders by midnight, the sentries have orders to kill on sight. He turned his back on her, burying his face in Brittany's neck. Isolde scrambled up, tears freezing on her cheeks before they even hit the floor. She looked around the room, at faces she had known her whole life. The baker who gave her bread crusts, the trainer she had helped bandage. None of them met her eyes. They were cowards, all of them. She ran. She didn't have time to pack a bag. She grabbed a thick wool cloak from the mudroom, a discarded one used for horses, and a satchel of medical herbs she kept by the back door. That was it. She hit the tree line just as the snow began to fall sideways. The wind bit through the wool, sinking its teeth into her bones. She ran until her lungs burned, driven by sheer terror and the howling of wolves in the distance, her former pack members howling in celebration of their new Luna. Isolde stumbled through the deep drifts for miles, heading toward the northern pass. It was forbidden territory, known as the Deadlands. No pack claimed it, because rumors said it was haunted. Right now, ghosts seemed preferable to Jackson's sentries. Her boots were soaked, her toes numb. The whiteout was so intense she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She tripped over a hidden root and tumbled down a steep ravine, slamming hard against a rock. Pain exploded in her ribs. She lay there in the snow, the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. This is it, she thought. This is how I die, unloved, unwanted. But then, a scent hit her nose. It wasn't the rot of death. It was metallic, copper, blood. She dragged herself up, squinting through the storm. A few yards away, hidden by a thicket of frozen brambles, was the mouth of a cave. The smell was pouring from it. Isolde crawled toward it, her survival instinct overriding her despair. She pushed through the brambles and collapsed onto the dry, rocky floor of the cavern. It was dark, but shielded from the wind. She fumbled in her pocket for a box of matches she always carried for the infirmary fireplaces. She struck one. The flare of light illuminated the cave. Isolde gasped, dropping the match. The cave wasn't empty. Lying on the floor, scattered like fallen soldiers, were wolves. Massive wolves. Not the normal timber wolves of her region, but beasts the size of ponies. There were 12 of them, and the floor was painted red with their blood. Isolde backed up against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 12 feral wolves. In her weakened state, even one could tear her throat out in a heartbeat. But they didn't move. She struck another match, holding it steadier this time. She looked closer. These weren't just sleeping. They were decimated. Deep gashes ripped through their thick fur. Some had arrows visibly broken off in their flanks. The scent of wolfsbane, acrid and bitter, hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. These wolves had been ambushed. Isolde's eyes were drawn to the center of the gruesome tableau. Lying apart from the others, near the back of the cave, was a beast of pure midnight black. He was colossal, easily a head taller than the others even while lying down. His breathing was ragged, a wet, rattling sound that indicated a punctured lung. Isolde knew she should run. These were clearly warriors from a powerful pack, perhaps a rival enforcement squad. If they woke up, she was dead. If their attackers found her here, she was dead. But if I leave them, she thought, looking at the black wolf, they die. She remembered her father, Arthur. We protect those who cannot protect themselves, Izzy. That is true strength, not claws but compassion. Damn it, she whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. She moved. Isolde quickly gathered dried moss and deadwood from the cave entrance, building a small, concealed fire near the back wall to avoid the smoke being seen from outside. The warmth began to fill the small space. She opened her satchel. She didn't have much. Some yarrow for clotting, willow bark for pain, and a small jar of silver sealing salve. It wasn't enough for 12 wolves, but she had to try. She started with the wolves closest to the entrance, checking their vitals. They were unconscious, their bodies fighting the wolfsbane toxin. She worked methodically, her fear replaced by the clinical focus she had learned in the infirmary. She pulled out arrowheads with steady hands, packed wounds with moss and yarrow, and tore strips from the hem of her petticoats to bind them. Hours passed. Her hands were stained crimson. She was exhausted, hungry, and terrified, but she didn't stop. Finally, she reached the black alpha. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful. His fur was like obsidian, thick and lustrous despite the matting of blood. A massive gash ran from his shoulder to his hip. It was deep. Too deep. "You're in trouble, big guy," she murmured, kneeling beside his massive head. The wolf's ear twitched. A low, rumbling growl vibrated in his chest, but he didn't open his eyes. He was too weak to attack, but the warning was clear. "Save your energy," she said softly, reaching out to touch his muzzle. "I'm not going to hurt you, but this is going to sting." She needed to clean the wound. She melted snow in a small tin cup over the fire and washed the gash. The wolf flinched, his claws scraping against the stone floor, creating sparks. "Shh," she cooed, instinctively releasing a calming omega pheromone, usually useless, but here, in the quiet dark, it seemed to have an effect. The wolf's breathing hitched, then slowed. She applied the last of her silver sealing salve. It sizzled against his skin, counteracting the poison on the blade that had cut him. As she worked, she noticed something strange. Around the wolf's neck, buried deep in the fur, was a collar made of a strange, dark metal. It was etched with symbols she didn't recognize, but one stood out. A crest of the eclipse. Isolde froze. The eclipse was the symbol of the Obsidian Alliance, the royal guard of the Alpha King. Rumors said the Alpha King, Silas Blackwood, was a tyrant who slaughtered packs for sport. They said his guard, the Nototifids, were demons in wolf skin. She was tending to the monsters of bedtime stories. Panic flared again, but she looked at the wolf's face. In his unconscious state, he didn't look like a tyrant. He looked like a creature in pain. "I don't care who you are," she whispered, finishing the bandage. "Tonight you're just a patient." The temperature in the cave dropped as the fire burned low. The blizzard outside was raging harder than ever. Isolde shivered violently. She had given her cloak to one of the smaller wolves who was trembling from shock. She curled up against the cave wall, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her teeth chattered. She was going to freeze to death before morning, even after surviving the fall. Suddenly, she felt a movement. The massive black wolf had dragged himself closer. He didn't growl. He nudged her leg with his wet nose. Then, with a groan of effort, he curled his massive body around her, creating a wall of living fur and heat. Isolde stiffened, waiting for the bite. It never came. Instead, the wolf rested his heavy head on her lap. He was offering her his body heat. She hesitated, then buried her hands in his thick fur. He was scorching hot, his metabolism working overdrive to heal. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. For the first time in her life, Isolde Sterling felt safe. Not in her pack house, not in her bed, but in a cave in the Dead Lands, wrapped in the arms of a monster. As sleep overtook her, she didn't notice the black wolf's eyes open. They weren't just animal eyes. They were a piercing, intelligent, electric blue, and they were watching her with an intensity that could burn the world down. The darkness of the cave was not silent. It breathed. Isolde drifted in and out of a restless sleep, anchored to reality only by the furnace-like heat of the massive black wolf curled around her. Every time she shivered, the beast would growl low in his throat, a sound that vibrated through her spine, and pull her tighter against his chest. Around 3 AM, the wind outside shifted, howling like a banshee. Isolde woke with a start, her heart pounding. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the cave walls. She sat up, her muscles screaming in protest. The black wolf shifted, his blue eyes snapping open instantly. They weren't groggy. They were alert, scanning the entrance of the cave before settling on her. "I need to check the others," she whispered to him, feeling foolish for talking to an animal. But the intelligence in those eyes made it feel necessary. She crawled out from his warmth, immediately hit by the biting cold. She moved to the fire, adding the last few sticks of wood she had gathered. As the flames licked upward, illuminating the cave, she gasped. The wolves were moving, not waking up exactly, but shifting in their sleep. Their paws twitched, their muzzles wrinkled. It was the pack dream, a phenomenon she had heard about, where pack members synced their consciousness during deep rest. She checked the grey wolf she had stitched up first. His breathing was steady. The poultice held. She moved to a reddish-brown wolf who had taken an arrow to the flank. He whined as she touched the bandage. "Easy," she murmured, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. "Sleep now, shadows tall, winter comes to cover all." As she hummed, a strange sensation washed over her. It felt like static electricity brushing against her mind. It was faint, like a radio tuned to the wrong station. Warmth. Safe. Who is she? Protect. Isolde rubbed her temples. She was hallucinating from exhaustion. Omegas didn't have telepathy, especially not with strange wolves. Suddenly, the black wolf let out a sharp, warning bark. Isolde froze. She heard it too. Outside, over the roar of the wind, came the crunch of heavy boots on snow. Crunch. 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 It wasn't an animal. It was a biped. Isolde scrambled to the back of the cave, her eyes darting around. There was nowhere to hide 12 giant wolves. If this was a hunter, or worse, one of the men who had attacked them, they were sitting ducks. The footsteps stopped at the cave entrance. "I smell blood," a rough voice growled from outside. "They're in here." "The tracks end at the ravine," another voice replied. "Boss said they're dead. No one survives the Deadlands in a blizzard." "I'm checking," the first voice insisted. Isolde's blood ran cold. She looked at the black wolf. He was trying to stand, his claws scraping the stone, but his legs gave out. The wolf's bane was still paralyzing his motor functions. He snarled, a sound of pure frustration and rage. He couldn't fight. None of them could. Isolde looked at the small pile of medical tools. She grabbed a scalpel, rusted and dull, but sharp enough if applied with force. "I ran from my pack," she thought, her hands shaking. "I ran from death. I won't let death find me here." She stood up. Instead of hiding behind the wolves, she stepped in front of the black alpha. She was small, frail, and unarmed, but she planted her feet. A figure stepped into the firelight. It was a man in mercenary leathers, a crossbow slung over his shoulder. He wore the crest of a red serpent, a rogue. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. When he saw Isolde, he blinked in confusion. He expected a squad of elite warriors, not a girl in a torn dress, holding a scalpel like a dagger. "Well, well," the rogue sneered, stepping fully inside. "What do we have here? A little lost lamb tending to the slaughter? He raised his crossbow, aiming it not at her, but at the black wolf behind her. Move, girl. That pelt is worth 10,000 gold coins. No, Isolde said. Her voice didn't tremble. It was flat, hard. The voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. The rogue laughed. You think you can stop me? I'm a Delta. You're nothing. I can smell the Omega on you from here. You reek of rejection. I said no. The rogue's finger tightened on the trigger. Have it your way. I'll shoot through you. Isolde didn't flinch. She grabbed a handful of the dried herbs she had been using, powdered wolfsbane she had extracted from the wounds, and flung it directly into the fire. The powder hit the flames and exploded in a cloud of acrid, choking purple smoke. The rogue coughed, blinded instantly. You witch! Isolde didn't wait. She lunged. She wasn't strong, but she knew anatomy. She knew exactly where the femoral artery was. She jammed the scalpel into the rogue's thigh. He screamed, dropping the crossbow. The bolt fired wild, shattering against the cave ceiling. The rogue backhanded her. The blow sent Isolde flying across the cave. She hit the stone wall with a sickening crunch, her vision going white. The rogue stumbled toward her, dragging his bleeding leg, murder in his eyes. I'm going to snap your neck for that. He reached for her throat. Snap. A blur of black motion intercepted him. The black wolf, fueled by sheer adrenaline and the threat to the girl, had forced his paralyzed body to move. He didn't just bite. He clamped his massive jaws around the rogue's head and twisted. The sound was wet and final. The rogue dropped like a stone. The black wolf collapsed immediately after, his energy spent. He landed heavily on top of the dead rogue, his breathing ragged. Isolde lay in the corner, blood trickling from her temple. She crawled over to the wolf, dragging her aching body across the stone. You idiot, she sobbed, checking his stitches. They had torn. You shouldn't have moved. The wolf looked at her, his blue eyes softening. He licked the blood from her forehead. Isolde rested her head against his neck, the adrenaline crashing. We're safe, she whispered, though she knew it was a lie. Just rest. She didn't sleep again that night. She sat guard with the rogue's crossbow in her lap, watching the entrance until the grey light of dawn began to bleed into the cave. The sun on the winter solstice is usually weak, but the morning after the blizzard, it was blinding. The light poured into the cave, bouncing off the snow outside and illuminating every corner of the shelter. Isolde woke up to heat. Suffocating, intense heat. She was no longer cold. In fact, she was sweating. The fur she had been using as a blanket was gone. The rough stone floor was gone. She was lying on something firm, something that rose and fell rhythmically. Isolde opened her eyes and screamed. She wasn't lying on a wolf, she was lying on a man. And not just any man. He was huge, easily 6'5", with broad shoulders that took up most of the space. He was stark naked, his skin tanned and littered with old battle scars. His hair was pitch black, messy from sleep, falling over a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Isolde scrambled backward, crab-walking across the cave floor until her back hit the cold wall. "Oh, God!" she breathed, covering her eyes. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" The cave was full of naked men, 12 of them. The wolves had shifted back. The man she had been sleeping on, the black wolf, sat up slowly. He groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. The movement caused the fresh bandage on his ribs to stretch. He looked down at it, confusion knitting his thick brows together. Then he looked at the dead rogue in the corner. Finally, he looked at Isolde. The air in the cave all sucked out of the room. Those eyes. The electric blue eyes. They were the same. "You," he rasped. His voice was deep, like gravel grinding together. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. Around them, the other 11 men began to stir. They were warriors, hardened, dangerous men with military-grade tattoos. As they woke, the confusion turned instantly to defensive aggression. "Status!" The Blackwood Alpha barked, his voice cracking with authority despite his injury. In a split second, 11 men were on their feet, ignoring their nakedness, forming a protective perimeter around their leader. "Perimeter clear!" A blond man, the grey wolf, said sharply, though he winced, clutching his shoulder. "Alpha Silas, we're alive." "Barely," Silas grunted. He stood up, towering over everyone. He didn't seem to care that he was nude. His focus was entirely on the small, terrified girl pressed against the wall. He took a step toward her. "Stay back," Isolde squeaked, holding up the crossbow. Her hands were shaking so hard the weapon rattled. I know how to use this." One of the men, a giant with a shaved head, snorted. "Is that a joke? Boss, let me snap her. She's probably with the ambushers." "Stand down, Titan," Silas ordered. He didn't look away from Isolde. "She's a spy, Silas," another man, the beta, urged. He had dark brown hair and eyes that calculated every threat. "Look at her. She's wearing rags. She's a stray. She probably lured us here." "I saved you," Isolde yelled, indignation overriding her fear. "You ungrateful heavy lumps. I dragged you in here. I stitched you up. I killed that guy." She pointed to the dead rogue. Silas looked at the rogue, then back at Isolde. He saw the bruise on her temple where the rogue had hit her. He saw the dried blood on her hands. His blood. He took another step. "Don't!" she warned, backing up. But she had nowhere to go. Silas stopped 3 feet from her. He kneeled down, bringing himself to her eye level. The movement was predatory, yet strangely respectful. He sniffed the air. "Pine," he murmured. "And antiseptic. And fear." He leaned closer. "And something else." He reached out. Isolde flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a blow. Instead, his large, rough hand cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed over the bruise on her temple. A spark, like static shock, jumped between them. Isolde's eyes flew open. Silas's pupils had blown wide, swallowing the blue. "Mine," he growled. The word wasn't spoken. It was vibrated from his chest. The 11 other men froze. The beta, Kale, dropped his jaw. "Silas, tell me you're joking. She's an Omega, a rogue Omega." "She is my mate," Silas announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. He stood up, pulling Isolde up with him as if she weighed nothing. "Mate?" Isolde squeaked, her feet dangling for a second before he set her down. No, that's impossible. My alpha rejected me yesterday. I'm broken. I can't have a mate." Silas's face darkened terrifyingly. "Rejected?" He looked at her neck. It was bare. No mark, but he could smell the fading scent of the Silver Creek pack on her. "Who rejected you?" Silas demanded. The temperature in the cave seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Name him." "Jackson," she whispered. "Alpha Jackson." Silas turned to his men. "Kale, clothes, now!" The men scrambled to find their shredded packs that had been dragged in with them. They threw a pair of spare tactical pants to Silas. He pulled them on, but kept his chest bare. He turned back to Isolde. He took the crossbow from her hands and tossed it aside like a toy. Then he grabbed her chin, tilting her head up. "Listen to me, little wolf," Silas said, his intensity burning her. "You are not broken. You saved the Obsidian Guard. You saved the Alpha King." Isolde's knees buckled. Alpha King. The rumors were true. She had just spent the night spooning with the most dangerous warlord on the continent. I didn't know," she stammered. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone." "Let you go?" Silas let out a dark, dry laugh. He stepped closer, crowding her space, his body heat radiating off him. "You sheltered 12 wolves in a storm. You bled for us. You killed for us." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "You are not going anywhere. You are coming back to the capital with me." "As a prisoner?" she asked, tears welling up. Silas pulled back, looking offended. He grabbed her hand and placed it over his heart. It was beating like a war drum. "No," he said, his voice ringing off the cave walls so clearly that every man in the room straightened to attention. "You return as the only thing that matters." He turned to his men. "Prepare for transport," Silas commanded, "and send a message to Silver Creek. Tell Alpha Jackson that Silas Blackwood is coming, and I'm coming to burn his pack to the ground for touching what belongs to me." "Silas, wait," Kyle interjected, stepping forward. "You can't just declare a rogue Omega as Luna. The council will riot. The noble houses. She has no lineage. She has no power." Silas looked at Isolde. He saw the fire in her eyes despite the fear. He saw the scalpel she still had tucked in her waistband. "She has more power in her little finger than the council has in their entire lineage," Silas growled. "She commanded me when I was a beast. She will command this kingdom." He looked at Isolde, his gaze heavy and possessive. "By the blood of the moon, I declare it. You are Luna." The convoy that descended upon the Silver Creek territory 2 days later did not look like a diplomatic mission. It looked like an invasion force. 6 armored black SUVs, bearing the gold crest of the eclipse, tore through the snow-covered roads leading to the packlands. In the back of the lead vehicle, Isolde sat stiffly, her hands gripping the leather seats. She was no longer wearing her torn rags. Silas had procured her a heavy cashmere coat the color of midnight and boots lined with fur, though she refused to let him buy her a gown. She wanted to face them as she was, the girl they threw away. Silas sat beside her, his massive frame taking up half the bench. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, but the savage energy of the cave was still there, lurking just beneath the silk tie. He held her hand, his thumb tracing the veins of her wrist. "Your heart is racing," Silas murmured, not looking up from a dossier Kyle had handed him. "You are afraid." "I lived in fear of Jackson for 21 years, Isolde said quietly. "Old habits die hard." "Kill the habit," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "Or I will kill him. The choice is yours." The convoy screeched to a halt at the iron gates of the Silver Creek pack house. The guards at the gate didn't even have time to ask for identification before the Obsidian Guard, the remaining 11 members of the Tout, poured out of the vehicles. They were fully armed, moving with the terrifying precision of special forces. They blew the gate off its hinges. Isolde flinched at the explosion, but Silas didn't blink. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow, then turned and offered her his hand. "Shall we?" he asked. Isolde took it. They walked through the courtyard, flanked by the guard. The noise had drawn the entire pack out. Men, women, and children gathered on the porches and balconies whispering. They looked at the destroyed gate, then at the giant man walking with a deathly confidence, and finally at the woman beside him. "Is that Isolde?" someone whispered. "The Omega. She's alive. Who is that with her?" The front doors of the manor flew open. Alpha Jackson stormed out, followed closely by Brittany and his beta, Marcus. Jackson looked furious, his face flushed. "Who dares attack my—" Jackson's voice died in his throat. He saw the crest on the SUVs. He saw the size of the soldiers. And then he met the eyes of the man in the black suit. Every alpha in the country knew Silas Blackwood's face. It was the face of the man who taxed them, who conscripted their warriors, and who executed rebels without trial. Jackson paled, his arrogance draining away like water. "King Silas, we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Silas drawled. He stopped 10 feet from the porch steps. "If you were, you might have cleaned up this pigsty you call a territory." Brittany, standing beside Jackson, looked confused. Her eyes darted to Isolde. A sneer curled her lip. "Why is the help standing next to the king? Isolde, get away from him. You were banished." "She is not the help," Silas said softly. The menace in his tone made the air vibrate. "And she was not banished. She was hunted." Jackson tried to regain his composure. He puffed out his chest. "Your Majesty, this is an internal pack matter. Isolde is a defective Omega who broke our laws. We showed her mercy by letting her leave." "Mercy?" Isolde spoke up. Her voice shook, but she forced it steady. "You threw me into a blizzard in a ball gown, Jackson. You told your sentries to shoot, to kill. You are a liar." Jackson spat, his eyes flashing amber. "You are a drain on resources. And now you've seduced the king to save your own skin? Pathetic." Silas released Isolde's hand. He took one step forward. The pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the courtyard like a physical weight. Several lower-ranking wolves in the crowd fell to their knees, gasping for air. "Careful, pup," Silas warned. "You are speaking to your queen." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Jackson froze. Brittany looked as if she had been slapped. "Queen!" Jackson laughed nervously. "Silas, surely you jest. She is wolfless. She is weak. The council will never accept a reject as Luna of the kingdom." "The council does what I tell them to do," Silas said. "And as for weak," he gestured to his guards. Isolde Sterling single-handedly kept the Obsidian Guard alive for 12 hours in the Deadlands. She killed a rogue Delta to protect me while I slept. She has more warrior spirit in her pinky finger than you have in your entire bloodline." Jackson's face turned purple. To be insulted in front of his pack was bad enough. To be compared unfavorably to Isolde was unbearable. "I demand the right of challenge," Jackson shouted, his ego overriding his survival instinct. The courtyard went deathly silent. The right of challenge was an ancient law. If a king tried to seize a pack member or interfere with internal hierarchy, the local alpha could demand a trial to prove their decision was just. Kyle, standing behind Silas, sighed. "He's an idiot. Boss, let me handle him." "No," Silas said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and handed it to Isolde. "He wants a challenge. I'll give him one." "I challenge her status." Jackson pointed a shaking finger at Isolde. "If she is truly worthy of being queen, let her face the trial of blood. If she survives, she takes the crown. If she fails, she dies, and you leave my lands." "The trial of blood is for warriors," Silas growled. "She is a healer." "Then she is not fit to be Luna," Jackson countered, seeing a loophole. "Unless you want to fight in her place. But the law says if a champion fights, it must be to the death." Silas began to roll up his sleeves, revealing thick forearms corded with muscle. "I was hoping you'd say that," Silas whispered. The trial of blood was traditionally held in a fighting pit, but Silas didn't have the patience for tradition. He designated the snowy courtyard as the arena. The Silver Creek pack formed a wide circle, their faces a mix of terror and excitement. Isolde stood on the porch, wrapped in Silas's coat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kyle and the other guards formed a protective wall around her. "He's going to kill him, isn't he?" Isolde asked Kyle. "If Jackson is lucky," Kyle replied grimly. "Silas has been looking for a reason to vent. The ambush in the cave. We found out it was funded by a coalition of Southern alphas. Jackson isn't part of it, but he's a convenient punching bag. In the center of the circle, Jackson stripped off his shirt. He was fit, muscular, and in his prime, a strong alpha by normal standards. But opposite him, Silas Blackwood looked like a different species entirely. Silas didn't shift. He didn't even take off his dress shoes. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides, watching Jackson with the boredom of a lion watching a mouse. "Begin!" Marcus, Jackson's beta, shouted, his voice cracking. Jackson shifted immediately. His bones cracked and reshaped, fur sprouting, until a large russet-colored wolf stood snarling in the snow. He lunged for Silas's throat, moving with impressive speed. Silas didn't shift. He simply stepped to the side. As Jackson flew past, Silas reached out and grabbed the wolf by the scruff of his neck and his hind leg. With a roar of exertion, Silas swung the 400-pound beast like a rag doll and slammed him into the frozen ground. The impact shook the earth. Jackson yelped, the breath driven out of him. Silas didn't let up. He didn't wait for Jackson to recover. He kicked the wolf in the ribs, hard. The sound of cracking bone echoed through the silent courtyard. "Get up," Silas commanded, his voice cold. Jackson scrambled up, whining. He snapped at Silas's legs, managing to tear the fabric of his trousers. Silas grabbed the wolf's jaw with one hand, his grip like a vice. He forced Jackson's head up, staring into the wolf's panicked eyes. "You called her weak," Silas hissed, tightening his grip. Jackson thrashed, claws scrabbling on the ice. "You threw her away. You, who were supposed to protect her. A true alpha protects the vulnerable. You preyed on them." Silas threw Jackson backward. The wolf tumbled, shifting back into human form from the shock and pain. Jackson lay in the snow, naked, shivering, and coughing up blood. "I yield!" Jackson screamed, holding up a hand. "I yield! She's Luna! Take her! Just leave!" Silas walked over, his boots crunching in the snow. He placed a heavy boot on Jackson's chest, pinning him down. "The trial of blood is to the death, Jackson. You cited the law. I am simply following it." Silas raised his fist. His knuckles were white. He was going to cave Jackson's skull in. "Silas, stop!" The voice wasn't Cale's. It was Isolde's. She pushed through the wall of guards and ran down the steps. She didn't run to Silas. She ran to Jackson. She threw herself between the king and the broken alpha. The crowd gasped. Silas froze, his fist hovering inches from Isolde's face. His eyes were black with bloodlust. "Move, Isolde. He deserves this." "He does," Isolde said, her voice ringing clear in the frosty air. She looked down at Jackson, who was looking up at her with terrified, pleading eyes. The man who had mocked her yesterday was now begging her for his life. He deserves to die. But if you kill him like this, in front of his pack, you're just the butcher they say you are. "I am a butcher," Silas growled. "It's how I keep the peace." "Not today," Isolde said. She reached out and placed her hand on Silas's clenched fist. "You said I am your queen? Then respect my judgment." Silas hesitated. The blackness in his eyes receded, revealing the electric blue. He slowly lowered his arm. He stepped back, taking his foot off Jackson's chest. "What is your verdict, my queen?" Silas asked, his voice dripping with a dangerous reverence. Isolde turned to the pack, the people who had shunned her. "Jackson remains alpha," she announced. Jackson let out a sob of relief. "Thank you, Isolde, thank you." "I'm not finished," Isolde cut him off, her voice icy. "He remains alpha of a broken pack, but Silver Creek is now under the direct jurisdiction of the Crown. We will be taking 50% of your revenue for the next 10 years as reparation, and—" She scanned the crowd until she found Brittany. The woman was cowering behind a pillar. "And Jackson is forbidden from taking a mate," Isolde declared. "If he wants to put power above love, let him rule alone. If I see him with Brittany or anyone else, the deal is off, and Silas returns to finish what he started." It was a cruel punishment. For a wolf, being mateless was a torture of the soul. Isolde had condemned him to a life of loneliness, exactly what he had tried to condemn her to. Silas looked at her, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked prouder in that moment than he had when he was winning the fight. "A fitting sentence," Silas agreed. He turned to the shivering Jackson. "You heard her. Get out of my sight." Jackson scrambled away, limping toward the house, humiliated and broken. The pack watched him go, their respect for him shattered. They turned their eyes to Isolde, bowing their heads one by one. Not out of fear of Silas, but out of awe for her. Silas wrapped his arm around Isolde's waist, pulling her flush against him. "You are dangerous," he whispered into her hair. "I learned from the best," she replied, leaning into him. "We need to leave," Kyle interrupted, looking at his phone. "Silas, we have a problem. The council has seen the live stream of the fight. They aren't happy. They're calling an emergency session. They claim you've been compromised by a witch." Silas's face hardened. The tender moment evaporated. "Let them talk," Silas said, guiding Isolde back toward the SUVs. "We are going to the capital. It's time I introduced my wife to the vultures." As they climbed into the car, Isolde felt a sharp pain in her chest. Not a heart attack, but a pull, a searing heat centered in her solar plexus. "Silas," she gasped, clutching her chest. "What is it?" He was instantly alert, checking her over. "My wolf," she whispered, her eyes widening in shock. "I can feel her. She's waking up." Jackson scrambled away, limping toward the house, humiliated and broken. The pack watched him go, their respect for him shattered. They turned their eyes to Isolde, bowing their heads one by one. Not out of fear of Silas, but out of awe for her. Silas wrapped his arm around Isolde's waist, pulling her flush against him. "You are dangerous," he whispered into her hair. "I learned from the best," she replied, leaning into him. "We need to leave," Kyle interrupted, looking at his phone. "Silas, we have a problem. The council has seen the live stream of the fight. They aren't happy. They're calling an emergency session. They claim you've been compromised by a witch." Silas's face hardened. The tender moment evaporated. "Let them talk," Silas said, guiding Isolde back toward the SUVs. "We are going to the capital. It's time I introduced my wife to the vultures." As they climbed into the car, Isolde felt a sharp pain in her chest. Not a heart attack, but a pull, a searing heat centered in her solar plexus. "Silas," she gasped, clutching her chest. "What is it?" He was instantly alert, checking her over. "My wolf," she whispered, her eyes widening in shock. "I can feel her. She's waking up." The Grand Council chamber of the Obsidian Citadel was a place designed to intimidate. Built from black marble and lit by levitating orbs of cold witchlight, it was where the fate of the werewolf kingdom had been decided for centuries. Today, it felt like an execution ground. Silas strode down the center aisle, his heavy boots echoing against the stone. He held Isolde's hand in a crushing grip. She was pale, beads of sweat gathering on her forehead. The burning in her chest had spread to her limbs, a feverish heat that made her skin sensitive to the touch. Seated in a semicircle on a raised dais were the Council of Elders, 12 ancient alphas representing the most powerful bloodlines. In the center sat Lord Ashford, a man with hair like steel wool and eyes that had seen too many winters. "You bring a stray into the sacred hall," Lord Ashford boomed, his voice bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "King Silas, your reign has been bloody, but we tolerated it because you were effective. But this? Declaring a wolfless, rejected girl as queen, it is madness." "She is not a stray," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is my mate." "A mate bond can be faked with potions," Ashford countered, gesturing to a dossier on his desk. "We received a report from Silver Creek. They say she is a witch, that she used dark arts to sedate you in that cave." Isolde stumbled, a fresh wave of agony ripping through her spine. She gasped, clutching her stomach. "She is sick," another elder sneered. "Look at her. She is too weak to stand. She cannot bear heirs. She cannot lead the hunt. She is an insult to the goddess." Silas released a growl that shook the foundations of the room. He stepped in front of Isolde, shielding her. "One more word, Ashford, and I will rip your tongue out." "Threats will not change the law." Ashford stood up. "The law states the queen must be a wolf. If she cannot shift, she is human, and a human cannot sit on the obsidian throne. I move for an immediate annulment of the bond and the execution of the witch." "Seconded," shouted another elder. "Silas," Isolde whispered. The pain was no longer just heat. It was a tearing sensation. Her bones felt like they were vibrating. "Silas, something is happening." Silas turned to her, panic flashing in his eyes. "Isolde, stay with me." "It hurts," she screamed, her knees hitting the marble floor with a crack. The council murmured, "See? She dies. The rejection is killing her belatedly." "No!" Silas roared. He dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms. "Isolde, look at me. Breathe." But Isolde couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt too thick. A sound was building in her ears, not a ringing, but a song, a howling, ancient and primal. Her back arched violently. A sickening crack echoed through the silent chamber. "Get a healer!" Silas shouted at Cale, who was standing by the doors. "Wait," Kyle said, his eyes wide. "Look." A light was beginning to emanate from Isolde's skin. It wasn't the witch light of the room. It was a soft, pearlescent glow, like moonlight trapped in flesh. Isolde screamed one last time, a sound that merged into a snarl. Her clothes shredded. Usually, the first shift is messy, bloody, and horrifying. But this was an explosion of light. Silas was thrown back by the force of the energy. He skidded across the floor, digging his claws into the marble to stop himself. When the light faded, silence fell over the chamber. A silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. Standing where the frail girl had been was a wolf. But not just any wolf. She was massive, nearly as large as Silas's beast form. And she was white. Not the cream or grey of normal wolves, but a stark, blinding, diamond white. Her fur shimmered, as if dusted with crushed stars. She shook her massive head, and when she opened her eyes, they weren't the brown of Isolde's human form. They were glowing, solid silver. Lord Ashford fell back into his chair, his face draining of colour. "The lupus lunae," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The moon wolf." It was a myth, a legend from the First Age. The moon goddess didn't just bless mates. Once every 1,000 years, she sent a piece of herself down to restore balance. The white wolf was said to possess the power of true healing and the command of the elements. Isolde, the white wolf, looked up at the dais. She didn't growl, she simply stared at them. And under that silver gaze, the elders felt the weight of their own sins. One by one, the council members scrambled off their chairs. They didn't just bow, they fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads against the cold floor. "Forgive us," Ashford choked out. "We did not know." Silas stood up slowly. He looked at the magnificent creature before him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't been wolfless because she was weak. She had been dormant because her wolf was too powerful for a normal body to contain. She needed the spark of a true alpha, his spark, to wake her up. He walked toward her. The council watched in breath-held terror. Silas shifted. His clothes tore away, replaced by the midnight black fur of the obsidian beast. The two wolves circled each other in the center of the room. Yin and yang. Night and day. The destroyer and the healer. Silas lowered his massive head, nudging her neck in submission. The king bowed to his queen. Isolde licked his muzzle, a gentle, forgiving gesture. Then she turned to the council and let out a howl. It was a beautiful, haunting sound that resonated in the chest of every wolf in the city. It was the sound of a new era. 3 months later, the winter had finally broken, giving way to a lush, green spring. The balcony of the Obsidian Palace overlooked the capital city, where rebuilding was underway. Under Silas's new decrees, tempered by Isolde's council, the taxes on the poor packs had been lifted, and the rogue hunting laws had been reformed. Isolde stood by the railing, the wind catching her hair. She looked healthy, vibrant, and strong. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You're thinking about them," Silas said softly. "Silver Creek?" Isolde asked. "Sometimes. I heard Jackson stepped down." "He didn't have a choice," Silas smirked. "Hard to lead a pack when your own people won't look you in the eye. They elected the baker as the new alpha. Apparently, he has a good heart." Isolde smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "A good heart makes a good leader." "I have a heart of coal," Silas murmured, kissing her neck. "Does that make me a bad leader?" Isolde turned in his arms, looping hers around his neck. She looked into his electric blue eyes. "You have a heart of coal, Silas. But diamonds are just coal that handled the pressure." Silas laughed, a sound that was no longer rare in the palace. He picked her up, spinning her around as the sun set over their kingdom. They had found each other in the dark, amidst blood and snow. They had been rejected by the world, only to build a new one together. The Alpha King had found his Luna, and the rejected Omega had found her crown. And there you have it. The story of Isolde Sterling proves that sometimes your greatest weakness is actually your greatest power waiting to be unlocked. She was rejected by a boy who wanted a trophy, only to be cherished by a king who needed a partner. It's a reminder that if you feel like you don't fit in, maybe it's because you were born to stand out. And maybe, just maybe, your cave of monsters is actually where you'll find your destiny. What did you think of Jackson's punishment? Was living alone too harsh, or did he deserve worse for throwing her into the blizzard? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story warmed your heart or gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a daily dose of romance, revenge, and redemption. Until next time, keep your head up. Your alpha is out there.